Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Bob Thibodeau, author of How One Cup of Coffee Can Change Your World. Bob, welcome to the show.
I appreciate it, man. I'm glad to be here.
Are you ready to get started?
Absolutely.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Once you do about the third edit, just hit publish. Just send it off and do it. You can get bogged down so easy in I'll set it aside for a couple weeks, come back and look at it again. And I could probably rephrase this just a little bit different. Maybe I can add this or take out this. Once you get through about the third edit, it's good enough to publish.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Probably the editing process.
Oh yeah, agreed.
You could have all the notes and you put it all together, and like I said, with the books I've written, some were 6 months in the editing process, and it seems like it's a never-ending battle. It's like, well, this could be rephrased just a little bit better. Do I really need to say it that way? Maybe I can go back and just rewrite that whole chapter. And so that's my theory now is once you get the first edit, yeah, the second edit, yeah, the third edit, yeah. If you get into fourth, fifth, and sixth edits, you're wading out into the swamp. So that's the editing is the hardest part, but it's also the part that you can't let it get you bogged down.
Well, it's also why I'm a huge believer in outsourcing that area. I've never edited
Absolutely.
my own books. I've always had an editor, and just getting back into it. It's great to go in there and proof and double check everything, but man, one of the best investments you can make is a good editor.
Yeah, and even if you can't afford a formal editor, go see your kid's high school English teacher or something. Hey, can you do me a favor and just read this over and point stuff out to me? And, something like that with, just to get a different set of eyes. If you try and do it all yourself, you're really going to get bogged down.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launches that has worked well.
All right. I usually do a pre-launch about 2 months in advance. And what I do is go ahead and start promoting it on Facebook, asking people, hey, would you like to be notified as this thing gets ready to go? I'm trying to put together a team that will help me, get all this together. And, I'll be on Kindle, and you can buy it for, 99 cents, but it'll help me in the rankings on Facebook and all that. And the last 2 books I did like that. Starting about 2 months in advance, you get about a team of 60 to 100 people that are interested in your what you're doing and helping you promote it. Then when it finally goes live on the Kindle, then they jump on, they buy it, and suddenly you're being ranked up there in whatever category you're trying to publish in, and that seems to give you a little bit of traction. And then you can go ahead and use that number 1 status or whatever that Amazon sends you to. Go ahead and promote the formal, hard copy of the book as well. But that's one method. Another one is definitely LinkedIn. I just love using LinkedIn, using that to reach out. And just even if you're not reaching out, touching people with an advertisement, putting it on your post. And if you got 500-600 people following it, and you can hashtag different categories and things like that, that'll show up in their feeds as well. So between the Facebook and the pre-launch, and then using Amazon Kindle during the launch, and then LinkedIn post-launch, I've found that helps out a lot.
So you mentioned about hashtag categories on LinkedIn. So that's an interesting thing, because people aren't really utilizing hashtags on LinkedIn as much as they should. So tell me a bit more about that process.
Okay, well, hashtags on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's algorithm is designed right around connections. That's what it's all about. You can be a follower of Oprah Winfrey, for example, and you think, oh, this is good. I'm on there with a million other people following Oprah Winfrey, and when I put something out there, it goes to all those people. No, because you don't really have a personal connection with Oprah Winfrey. But if you got connections with 200 people that you are corresponding with, you're liking their posts, commenting on their posts, they're liking your posts, commenting on your posts, and you put something out there, it'll show up in those 200 news feeds. So LinkedIn's algorithm is all tied up with who you're connected with and corresponding with and having a dialogue with, and the use of hashtags. So if you're not using hashtags, you're eliminating a whole segment of the population that you may not be corresponding on a frequent basis with, but if they're liking things, hashtag, I'll just use the example coffee, they're hashtag coffee, and then you put your book out there about coffee and things like that, like we're talking about, then you suddenly show up in their feeds. Otherwise, you wouldn't show up. So, if you're not using hashtags, you're missing out on a huge segment of marketing.
So with different social media platforms, there's always discussion about how many hashtags should you use. And that discussion typically with Instagram is usually around 20 to 25. Some people talk about 5 to 10 hashtags even on Facebook. So what do you feel would be the sweet spot for the amount of hashtags that you should use on LinkedIn? Because we do the same thing. When we post our episodes, we have certain hashtags that we utilize. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
I just keep it at about 5 because I don't want to look like I'm trying to spam everybody. So I'll keep mine at about 5. But I try and zero. My objective is to not market to everybody, but to market to those people who are my target audience. So that's what the hashtags are used for.
So give us a couple of examples of hashtags you use specifically for your target market, Bob.
Well, really, it all depends on what it is I'm trying to do. The podcast training program and things like that. It's podcast training, how to podcast. If it's marketing the book, How One Cup of Coffee Can Change Your World, it'll be how to will be a hashtag. Coffee by itself will be a hashtag. Another one would be self-help will be a hashtag. So it's really dependent on what it is I'm trying to do with that particular post.
And I love that you bring that up because we do the same thing when we're promoting our podcast episodes. We'll talk about get published podcast, get published, book publishing, podcast, how to podcast, those type of things. And just making sure that it's targeted, because the last thing you want to do is use a bunch of random hashtags and hope for the best. It's kind of like the pasta mentality, right? Throw a bunch of pasta and throw it on the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to combine. Let's say you had 3 different podcasts, 3 different subjects, plus 2 different books with different hashtags, and you compile them all into every post you put out there. That's not going to work. I mean, you can do it, but you're not going to be favorable in the eyes of the people who could care less about pasta. Put it like that.
When you mentioned about the LinkedIn algorithm too, because I'm noticing that as well, it really seems to be all about how you're engaged with your first connections, because you got first, second, third connections, and fourth. But it seems to all be about the ones that you have those first connections with, and then commenting on those and building those relationships, and then the algorithm seems to pick up a little bit.
That's right. If you are just like I said, trying to jump on other people's conversations and things like that, until they actually start dialoguing directly with you, you're not going to see much traction. My idea on LinkedIn, if you want to call it, lack of a better term, LinkedIn marketing, is not to go on and talk to as many people as I can about what it is I'm trying to do. I try and engage in a conversation. Hey, I love this post. This is really needful for this time, whatever the topic might be, whatever. And then they, oh, thank you very much. What is it you do? Well, I do this and this, but I love what you're doing with XYZ. So it's that back and forth. Like you're having coffee with someone. That's where I try and put it. I'm just sitting here having a cup of coffee. Hey, what do you do? Wow, that's awesome. Type thing. And it might be 6 weeks before I get into, hey, is it okay if I share this with you, this book that I'm just publishing? And by that time, they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. But if you just try, hey, can I put this on your page? And they're going to no.
Exactly. Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Wow. Okay, my favorite book is, for me, it's the Bible. I read that book every single day, have been for 25 years. But other than the Bible, I'm a huge George S. Uh, Patton. General Patton is was my idol when I was in the military. I studied each and every book published about him, learning so much about leadership, and that was probably anything to do with General Patton was the books I was reading.
And for a final quote, what is your favorite quote and why?
Again, from General Patton.
Mm-hmm.
A good plan executed now is better than a perfect plan tried later.
That was actually the quote that I was going to mention as well when you mentioned Patton. I love that quote because we use that in our seminars where we're talking about a plan that violently executed today is perfect, is much better than a perfect plan next week. Just get out there and just do it.
That's right. Get out there, do it, and then adjust along the way as needed. Amen.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
My website is bobthibodeau.com, and they can also find me on LinkedIn. Robert Thibodeau is the LinkedIn, and you just type that in, and I'll pop right up.
Well, Bob, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey
Have
ahead.
a great day. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.